The sound of flesh burning, the sound of flames exploding. Everything was beyond repair. Mason's knees gave way, and he fell to the ground. Tears streamed down his face. The sound of dripping echoed in his ears. I turned my head and froze. Rufus seemed to be crying too. Although it wasn't obvious, his eyes were slightly red, and there was a drop of water on his chin. Whether it was rain or tears, I didn't know. My best friend wiped her tears with her sleeve from a distance, crying incessantly. But I couldn't even go over and comfort her. My best friend was suddenly grabbed by the collar by Mason. His eyes were bloodshot. "She's not dead, right? That's just a model, right? Where is she now?" His expression was so insane, it was terrifying. I furrowed my brows and pushed him away. The man, who was previously going crazy, suddenly froze. In the next moment, he grabbed my hand. He slowly turned his head to look at me, and with a resolute tone, he called out, "Estelle Severin." My heart skipped a beat. How could he recognize me? Then he said, "Where is she?" I breathed a sigh of relief and calmly replied, "Are you talking about that, miss? She has already been cremated, we all saw it with our own eyes." Mason remained silent, only staring at my left hand. Because of nervousness, my left thumb unconsciously rubbed against my index finger. It was a habitual action of mine. "Oh." As if being scalded, I immediately let go of my hand and smiled. "I was bitten by a mosquito just now." "What's wrong, Mr. Ladner?" He took a step towards me. At that moment, a hoarse voice came from behind. It was a staff member from the funeral home, bending down to hand a small box to my friend. "You must be the family member of the deceased, here are her ashes." Tears streamed down my friend's face as she took it. Mason trembled all over and rushed forward with extreme speed, snatching the box. My friend looked at him in shock. "Mason, are you this shameless?" Ignoring her, Mason held the box and walked towards the exit, muttering, "Estelle, I'll take you home, I'll marry you." "She's dead, how can you marry her?" My friend angrily retorted. Mason paused and turned his head, saying, "A ghost marriage will do. As long as she can be mine." Everyone present was shocked by his words. I rushed forward and held him, shouting, "Mr. Ladner, respect the deceased, please show some respect for this young lady." Mason said, "Her last wish was to marry me." His tone paused, and a gentle expression appeared in his eyes. "I will fulfill her wish. Estelle must be very happy underground." At that moment, I couldn't help but feel nauseous. Who is he acting for? Rufus stepped forward and squinted his eyes. "Mason, I won't let you take her away, she doesn't belong to you." He made a gesture, and the bodyguards surrounded him. In the next moment, one of them rushed forward to grab the ashes. Mason dodged nimbly. But more and more bodyguards rushed forward, and Mason struggled to hold on. A gunshot rang out. Rufus's expression changed. One of the bodyguards held his chest where he was shot and slowly fell to the ground. Mason wiped away the blood from his face, his expression indifferent. "No one can stop me today." He walked towards the exit step by step, and the bodyguards retreated as he approached. No one dared to approach him again. But I had to stop all of this no matter what. I walked to his side and said, "Sir, before Miss Severin passed away, she said something to me." Mason paused his steps. "What did she say?" "I can see that you have feelings for Miss Severin, but she's gone. She once said that if you could appear at her funeral." I suddenly reached out and snatched the box of ashes. It was only because Mason was listening so attentively that I succeeded. I raised the box of ashes and took a step back. A look of fear appeared in Mason's eyes. "Put her down." I smiled. "Mason, at least one thing I didn't lie to you about. Estelle said that if there was even a 1 in a million chance of you getting her ashes, it would be better to scatter them." As soon as I finished speaking, I scattered the ashes in the air. "No!" Mason rushed forward, but all he could see was the dust being carried away by the wind. Tears flowed from his eyes. He cried out, "Estelle." A strong wind blew, and I couldn't help but feel a little sad. There was no one else but myself who could destroy myself so thoroughly. But I really didn't want to have anything to do with Mason anymore. I closed my eyes. Suddenly, Mason stood up and took steps towards me. His voice was low and seemed to come from hell. You ruined my Estelle. I will make sure you can't live and can't die. As he approached closer and closer, I couldn't help but take a few steps back, feeling scared of this unfamiliar Mason. In the next moment, someone suddenly pulled me away. Run! Rufus pulled me and we ran desperately, crossing paths and passing through raindrops. When he pushed me into the car, I was still in a state of shock. The man got into the car and snorted with crossed arms. Yuri, quite bold. I closed my eyes, feeling extremely exhausted. Then I felt my wrist being pulled, and someone gently patted the dust off my hand. Why did you help me? I asked. Rufus said, I'm not helping you, I just don't want Mason to get what he wants. I nodded. It's normal for the antagonist and the male lead to clash in a novel. When the car stopped, I went to pull the door, but it was locked. I turned my head and said, Thank you for your help, but I've troubled you for too long. Rufus stared into my eyes. Are you sure you can leave? I frowned slightly, but in the next moment, I was startled by the sound of gunfire coming from behind. I saw Mason driving a Maybach in the rearview mirror, swiftly approaching us like lightning. His eyes were dark and gloomy. I anxiously said, Hurry, please help me again. Rufus chuckled and didn't seem to care about the rain of bullets around him. Go. As the car was moving, Rufus seemed to pat my head. Only by staying by my side can you be safe. For the next few days, I stayed in the guest room of Rufus's house. He would leave early and come back late, and I hardly ever saw him. Only a few occasional news reports made me realize one thing. It seemed that Mason was desperately looking for me. But Rufus did a good job of protecting me. However, I never expected that even with 24-hour security and so many bodyguards guarding the villa, I would still be brought in front of Mason by someone. When Rufus was not around, Mason bribed the maid in the villa. After I unsuspectingly drank the milk handed to me by the maid, my vision went black and I lost consciousness. When I opened my eyes again, Mason was sitting across from me in a suit. Awake? He asked. He slowly came closer and lifted my chin. How should I punish you? I sensed that something was off about him. The previous Mason was always elegant and indifferent, but now he seemed like a completely different person, exuding a dark aura. His next words sent chills down my spine. He looked at me and said each word slowly, Estelle Severin. I pretended to remain calm and said, Who are you calling? I don't know what you're talking about. He smiled. After chasing after me for so long, if I can't recognize you, then I must be a fool. He carefully examined my face and commented, Not bad, quite pleasing to the eye. I turned my face away forcefully and pushed his hand away. What are you doing? I am not Estelle. He sneered. No? We've slept together for so long, I know everything about your reactions in bed. Want to give it a try? As he said that, he lifted my chin and kissed me, while his other hand was undoing my collar. I felt like I was on the verge of collapse, struggling in his embrace. But it was futile. Even though I had a different body, his touch was still so familiar to me. He just touched the back of my head lightly and brushed my earlobe, causing my waist to go weak uncontrollably. He stopped moving, and I stopped struggling. His face buried in my neck, and he chuckled softly. But as he laughed, my neck gradually became damp. Estelle, you're back, he said with a hint of tears in his voice. I stared blankly at the ceiling. I didn't know how he recognized me, but it didn't matter now. I didn't expect him to understand my inner thoughts, and he pinched my nose. Estelle, you have too many flaws. For example, the way you look at me, it's different from how you look at others. I sneered, wondering if he wanted me to stab his eyes with a knife. He realized my estrangement and held me silently, as if he wanted to pull me into his body. I heard his words in my ear like a spell, Estelle, I will never let you leave me, never. Staying by Mason's side felt incredibly long, and I had never felt so tortured before. There was no doubt that he doted on me. He personally took care of almost everything I used to do. Every morning, he would carry me to the wash basin, squeeze toothpaste for me, and prepare breakfast for me. But he never allowed me to leave this house. One time, when I climbed down from the second floor using the twisted neck tree outside the window, the next day, that tree was cut down. And my neck was covered with an iron chain. In the endless loneliness, I had moments of breakdown, begging him to let me go, or at least give me a knife so I could kill myself. But in the next moment, the sound of shattered glass shocked me into speechlessness. Mason punched the fish tank, causing the entire glass to shatter. He looked at me standing barefoot on the ground and softened his voice. "Baby, let me take you to put on your shoes." As if the argument from earlier had never happened. I secretly used his phone to ask for help from Rufus. But to my surprise, Mason's company grew astonishingly within a short period of time. And he mercilessly launched attacks on the Trainer family's company, intercepting orders, snatching customers. Rufus was also overwhelmed for a while. On a night when it seemed like all routes were blocked, I yelled at Mason, "If you love Hazel, why don't you marry her? Why are you trapping me here? Get lost." After a moment of silence, I saw his eyes gradually light up. I thought I had finally awakened his conscience. Because for the next few days, he stopped clinging to me. One morning, Mason pulled me up and had me dressed up beautifully. He took me to the original football field. There were people playing football below, but he didn't watch. His voice choked up. "Estelle, we have missed out on a lot." I remained expressionless, not responding. I wondered if he was finally going to let me go. But the next moment, he suddenly said, "So let's not miss out anymore." He stood up and took out a small square box from his pocket. At this moment, the big screen also turned towards us. There was a clamor of voices. He slowly squatted down and said, "Estelle, marry me." I looked into his eyes and at the ring in his hand. The system had once said that if one day I could get Mason to propose to me and I accepted, then the mission would be considered complete. If I didn't accept, then I would be erased. Just like in the beginning, falling in front of everyone with a thump, but this time I might not wake up again. Do I want to survive? I asked myself in my heart. But at this moment, I knew my answer very clearly. I looked at him and softly uttered a word. "No." I saw his face quickly turn pale. Mine did too. I knew the system was extracting my soul again. I continued speaking. "Mason, I used to like you a lot, but you could never see my existence. Just because of something Hazel said, you could leave me alone in the cinema, making me wait for you until dawn before you came back. But the truth is, I understand now. It's not your fault, you just don't love me." Mason's lips trembled a few times, muttering, "It's not, I just didn't know my own heart at that time." I ignored him, stood up and looked around, meeting the puzzled or ambiguous expressions of everyone. "I was also proposing to you at this football field back then. As long as you even lied to me and said yes, I could have survived at that time, instead of watching my own body being cremated, instead of being forced by you to choose to scatter my own ashes. I don't love you anymore. I don't hate you either. I just want to tell you, I'm the kind of person who can let go and move on. Do not look back." When I finished the last sentence, I saw Mason covering his face in pain, I saw Hazel's expression of hatred and jealousy, and I saw Rufus standing in the crowd, wearing a still smug smile, only showing approval in his eyes. The world in front of me collapsed. The long-lost mechanical sound of the system rang in my ears, announcing the failure of the mission. I closed my eyes, no longer longing for this world. With a thump, I fell heavily from a high place. Rubbing my painful knees, I stood up. But the next second, I froze. In front of me was the entrance of the residential area, and the advertisement board of the convenience store was still flashing with colorful lights. Pedestrians came and went as usual, and the sky was shining with sunlight. Everything was like a normal afternoon when I came out to buy snacks after finishing a novel. Everything was ordinary and real world. After a while, I covered my face. Tears, however, overflowed from between my fingers. I had come back. Back to my world.